Please allow me to welcome Martin from HRS for the next keynote. He'll be speaking about new climate reshaping corporate lodging and their impact on the hotel industry. Whilst the guys are putting on the presentation, you are? Yes, they are. Well, Martin, how was the day so far?
It was very interesting, especially the strong focus on technology and hospitality, which I'm definitely an ambassador for, always. It's very nicely represented, and yeah, very nice assortment of content, definitely, and good organization, thanks.
Guys, are you ready? I see a black screen.
Yes.
I will not go off the stage before there's a presentation.
We will start with a short video first, actually.
You start with the video? Oh, that's the video. Have fun. Stage is yours.
It only took Typhoon Vamco a few hours to submerge more than half of the communities here.
The New Year rains were some of the worst in nearly a decade. Tens of thousands in Jakarta were forced from their homes and still aren't able to return.
Smoke generated by the inferno covers 5.5 million square kilometres. That's the size of Europe.
So, we are seeing unprecedented conditions.
Today, millions of people took to the streets in over 150 countries around the world to protest the climate change situation.
We're not drowning! We're not drowning! We're here today to show that we stand together united in our commitment to climate justice. And we demand change!
The European Parliament has voted to declare a climate emergency.
Japan's lawmakers have declared a climate emergency.
We must get our own house in order regarding a declaration of a climate emergency.
Direct motion urging the government to declare a climate change emergency.
Let's give them a signal, give them a sense of hope that yes, there's a climate emergency.
The world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, is jumping into the battle to address climate change.
We have to work together to meet these goals. It has to be done that way.
The first order I'm signing is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad.
Millions of younger employees at countless companies and corporations are desperate for action, not more work.
Every week we're seeing new and undeniable climate events, evidence that accelerated climate change is here right now.
I deeply understand the critical impact of climate change on food and water supplies, and that's why I believe all of us need to take action now.
So, hello everybody to the keynote on climate change, and I would like to use the next 20-25 minutes to talk about climate change and how it affects the hospitality industry, and ultimately what hoteliers can do and have to do and why they have to act now. First of all, to give you a little bit more context, why am I from HRS talking about this? Most of the people in this room probably know HRS as the OTA, hrs.com or DE, trading hotel beds on our website. Yet, roughly 15 years ago, we spin up a new corporate business, which is actually servicing business travel or businesses, ultimately large multinational corporations, with a digital platform approach from procurement to booking to payment. And today we have roughly 40% of Fortune 500 companies working to the most part exclusively with the HRS platform in order to manage all of their transient business travel, group travel, meetings, and long stays all across the globe. So Why is climate change important? That was our first question, actually, when we did a survey roughly 1.5 years ago. And normally our stakeholders on the company side would respond with savings, savings, savings. We need savings. Yet there was something new happening. 85% of corporate decision makers said the next 5 years, everything we want to do is around sustainability, and especially the decarbonization of our travel and lodging activities. So the question is, why is this important? And I think you have seen some good examples of why generally it's important, but ultimately I want to give you a few more. Sorry, we're still on the other slide. What is the key thing that is changing? I think everybody has a vague understanding of climate change and what the impact will be, so I want to give you a little more background. Ultimately, the core problem is that the global surface temperature on Earth and this increase is actually doubling every 10 years. So the pace in which our surface temperature is increasing is exponentially growing. And the reason for that is, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, which, by the way, the companies we work with, ultimately the top 100 companies globally, are responsible for to 80% of all the global emissions. The other 20% is mainly coming from the transportation segment, where lodging, in the context of travel and tourism, of course, has an integral part. So what happens if we have this immense growth of the surface temperature? Well, one of the key aspects that scientists are projecting that will happen is that the inhabitable land on the surface of the world, basically today this would be rather yellow, not red. Because this surface inhabitable land is growing from 0.8% to 19% by the year of 2070. So what will be the consequence? The consequence is simple. 3 billion people on this globe will have to move. They will have to move to the northern hemisphere, and you can probably anticipate what will happen to our free market conditions if this happens. And that is why the corporate CFOs of the top 100 companies globally make this their priority, because it will ultimately destroy all of their financial claims and all of their current businesses that they're running. And this is also why legislators globally, following the United Nations Committee for Climate Change Action, have decided to install a whole new framework of legislation globally to fight climate change. We have just seen since 2017, in the last 4 years, a 20-fold increase on climate action laws globally. The very latest one is from 2 days ago, where the United Nations Committee for Human Rights decided that access to a clean environment is now a human right. And I think that is speaks for itself and will definitely have its influence globally. Of course, there's still some countries we need to convince, because countries like Russia, China have basically not voted in this global vote. Still, there are key changes from a regulator perspective. So now I have the pager issue. Okay. The two key areas where we see changes in legislation is basically in the here and now and the tomorrow. In the here and now, I think everybody knows about carbon taxation. So the European trading scheme for emission allowances, that companies can trade their allowances that they're not using. One great global example is the company of Tesla, who have been always selling their emission allowances that they're not using because they're building electric cars. And they do this in this system. And these allowances, in terms of the pricing, where other companies who need to purchase these allowances because they're running out of their own, these prices have, in March this year, reached a price of a little bit more than 50 euro, which in 2016 was projected by Bloomberg to be the price of 2030. So we are seeing across the board, be it for allowances, be it for cross-border adjustment taxes, be it for offsets from offsetting projects with carbon credits, that these prices are rocketing through the roof already today and are exceeding by far all of the projections on these price developments from the past. So we will ultimately see the cost to offset a metric ton of greenhouse gas emissions will be 10 times higher as today. And again, anytime somebody in history made a projection about it, he was wrong, and it was much, much faster, much higher than that. So this is a big problem for all companies who are emitting greenhouse gases today, because they will today and tomorrow be charged an immense amount for every metric ton they are emitting. The second element is a little bit through the back door, you could say, is about how we manage today that we can mitigate emissions in the future. And that is through so-called ESG ratings, so environment, social, and governance aspects that are rated by independent auditors. There is two main institutions, there's central banks, and then there's the Basel Committee for International Banking Supervision, who have last year agreed to make ESG ratings mandatory for all companies above 1,000 employees as of this year. And by 2024, all companies larger than 500 employees will have to employ ESG ratings. When you have no ESG ratings, you will be excluded from the capital market. So whenever you need liquidity from your bank, be it your local branch of the Kölner Sparkasse or any other bank, and you cannot prove with an independent auditor that you have an A+ or AA kind of rating, you will not be provided with capital in order to scale your future innovations and your future growth. So this is probably the best reason why 85% of our customers say, this is the only one thing we want you, HRS, as our lodging provider, to consider. And when we look ahead as one, or what happens basically, how are corporates responding to it? Corporates are not new to this field. They have anticipated this and saw this coming for quite some time. Actually, most of the large multinational corporations have begun to work in this field to optimize on their greenhouse gas emissions. And one good example is, so they started this 10 years ago, and one good example is here the initiative that was initiated by Jeff Bezos from Amazon, the Climate Pledge, which basically allows companies globally to join in and sign the pledge to achieve net zero or a net zero roadmap on their emissions 10 years ahead of the timeline that the Paris Agreement originally was projecting. So 2050 to achieve a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase to pre-industrial age. By the way, right now, today, we are projected at 2.6 degree Celsius increase by 2050, so we will fail, and we will have probably 1.5 billion people having to leave their homes by 2070. So right now, as it looks, great commitments from all the companies, from all the nations, yet as long as some countries on this globe do not join in this initiative, we will fail, and we will definitely be in severe trouble. So these are some of our customers, and one customer that is one of our lighthouse customers that I always like to reference because they're really always on the forefront of anything when it comes to digitalization or all the trends that we're basically looking into, is Siemens. And Siemens have this year basically published their degree framework. And in this degree framework, it's basically spelled by decarbonization, ethics, governance, resource efficiency, equity, and employability. The number one priority is, as you can see, decarbonization. And what you read when you read the details is net zero operations by 2030 and to achieve net zero supply chain by 2050. And they want to cut emissions by 20% by the year of 2030. Just to recap, that is in 9 years from now, or 8.5. And so you might wonder now, okay, why supply chain? Why is the supply chain important? Usually companies work by the so-called greenhouse gas protocol. It's kind of a framework of methodologies that you can use in order to identify sources for greenhouse gas emissions in your company or in your overall operations. And it usually works by 3 scopes. Scope 1 is about the electricity you purchase. Scope 2 is about your internal facilities and infrastructure, your fleets, your carpools, anything you basically have as assets in your company. And scope 3 is all the purchased third-party products and services. And I said earlier, many companies have started to reduce their emissions for the last 10 years, and so did Siemens. And today they look at an emission or a total a number of metric tons per year of 100,000 metric tons of carbon equivalent emissions per year in Scope 1 and 500,000 in Scope 2. So 600,000 in total in their direct accessible regime, what they can control. Yet in Scope 3, all the services that they're purchasing from third parties, for example, hotel partners selling out a room for their travelers to stay at, the Scope 3 is currently still counting 11 million metric tons of carbon emissions. So that is why they focus on the supply chain in the future to reduce emissions and ultimately achieve a carbon net zero roadmap. So they have to let go on 11 million metric tons. How do you do this? You do this by so-called science-based targets that you set out. So you install measurements all across your supply chain. You have to get all of your suppliers, every single hotel, to report to you every year what are your emissions, what is your footprint. And not only for the hotel operations, but for the very product, the one room night that I'm purchasing, they need this transparency. And they need to find a strategy and a roadmap with their suppliers of how the suppliers are planning to reduce this to zero. So the question is, how can we do that? And that was our question. So we first started with thinking, okay, how many emissions are there with a room night in a hotel? Oftentimes we look at the entire tourism and travel industry, so we were asking, okay, how much emissions are coming from this industry? 22% of global emissions, of all global emissions, come from the transportation sector, and 8% in total come from the tourism sector. And when we just look at the travel and tourism sector, then we had the contrary development in the last years. Between 2005 and 2016, instead of reducing emissions, we have increased globally 60% on the emissions because we have been traveling more. There was no SAF fuels on airlines before or on airplanes before, and nobody in the hospitality industry was even thinking about something like that. So again, the question is, if we are responsible for parts of the 20% of the emissions, what can we do? How can we lower it? So we need to know our own footprint. And everybody in the travel industry, and especially in corporate travel, thinks first about airplanes. The problem with airplanes is that there's not much you can do. You can't optimize much from a consumer point of view because there's just roughly 22 aircraft models, 43 variations in the air, usually winglet optimizations, engine optimizations. But all in all, you emit 100 kilogram per hour. And you can change the route of the airplane, you can change the schedule of the airplane, you can change the aircraft that is on your trip, so you can just decide to travel or not to travel. Whereas in other segments of a usual business trip, like the lodging segment, there's way more you can do because there are suppliers who have for many years focused on reducing their emissions or have just very fresh or newly built buildings. And then there's also resort hotels, large hotels with restaurants, with swimming pools, spas, that maybe have not undergone a renovation recently. So we worked with the Cornell University and their School of Hotel Administration, and they built an annual sustainability index across 22,000 hotels, roughly globally, larger footprint on the US side of the planet. But we found that there's a span of 6 to 125 kilogram per night that you would emit when you stay at a hotel. So you could argue that you can make some smarter choice or not so smart choice, depending on also other conditions of your trip. But here we definitely have a sweet spot where we can make smarter choices and by that reduce the overall emissions. And you need to think about these companies running in our system between 2 and 5 million room nights every year. We also work with governments. We have seen firefighters in the beginning. The firefighters in Australia, but also in California, actually book their travel through HRS. And so that's why it's important for these people ultimately to understand their impact to the fire that they're trying to remove. So we took this and we thought, okay, how can we help our customers with that? First of all, we thought, okay, let's talk to the hotel partners and let them give us their footprint. So case closed, very easy. Unfortunately, we're living in a very much fragmented industry. I mean, overall, 75% of the hotel industry are independent hotels. So there's not just one hotel chain we can go to and ask for their footprint report. Also, our customers usually have an exposure with their contracted suppliers to between 10 and 20% of the overall hotels they utilize. Many of these large customers have thousands and thousands of hotel partners that they book with every year, and millions of room nights that they stay in these hotels. So every hotelier would probably say, yes, I have once participated in a corporate RFP in order to get or to promote a corporate rate. Again, the issue is that these conversations only happen with a small fraction of hotel partners that are really used by these corporates. And what we found by analyzing data from RFPs from 2019, that when corporates asked for the so-called CSR data from hotels, only 7% of hotels provided the information. So either they don't want to share it, or they don't have the information, which would be a much bigger problem for us. And so we said, okay, let's park it here and do further research. And so we thought about our goals. And the key goals we wanted to achieve is, number one, we want to enable the reporting, the reduction, and the removal of carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions from the lodging activities from our customers. In order to do that, we need to identify and promote sustainable suppliers, those that have a strategy. And second, we need to provide travelers of these corporates an intuitive and workable orientation, because on average, if you have 300 plus hotels responded to your search, then you need to make a difference. So we continued the research and we thought, okay, maybe there are some companies that can give us certifications or other form of information about the hotels that our customers work with. And there's roughly 8,000 sustainability organizations out there in the industry today. And of course, we can't work with 8,000 of these suppliers. So we reached out to the hotel chain partners of HRS. And we have roughly 2,000 hotel chains connected to our platform. And just by spot data checks, we analyzed the different programs, and we found that only 1/3 of the hotel chains actually have a sustainability strategy in place. And oftentimes, it is not more than an outsourced questionnaire that their hotels are checking off. Do you mitigate straws? Do you mitigate plastic cups? Do you launder towels only when they're dropped to the floor? Of course, nothing of this has a crazy impact on the emissions, because 80% of the emissions in a hotel comes from energy. So that's where we found, okay, we can't work with the reports and the data that the chains can provide us, because it's not comparable. It's not structured data that we can use in order to infer on a footprint per room night in a hotel. So we analyzed then 200 agencies and their services that are usually referenced by the hotel industry, independent hotels ultimately. And also here we found that only 30% roughly of these agencies relate to any standard, like the greenhouse gas protocol or the ISO standard for managing emissions. So 2/3 of the players out there provide you for a certain price tag, a label, but ultimately that will push you out of business very soon, because it doesn't give you any information, any credible information, in order to retain business in the future. Also for your own ESG rating to get liquidity for your next refurbishment or so. So this is why we decided we need to come up with our own form of assessment in order to enable that data gathering and transparency shaping. So we today provide, as of this year now, footprint web assessments to all hotel partners globally, for large global hotel chains, but also for small individual hotels. We provide energy and environment web assessments to derive indicators of what is the strategy of the hotel that it is taking to achieve more environmental sustainability. And we provide a net zero as a service model where we offset all the unavoidable emissions that we can measure with our system. This is important because in November we will have the COP26 conference from the United Nations in Glasgow, and they will talk about that unfortunately 85% of the offsets that are being used, so whenever you book let's say a plane or a trip from Berlin to Cologne, just like I did this morning, and you try to offset that trip with companies, well, you know all of these names, 85% of these offsets are actually having no effect on the atmosphere. They're not removing carbon emissions from the atmosphere. They're not significantly lowering any of the emissions happening. And when you look deeper, you will figure out that there's actually child labor involved in planting trees in Brazil or Indonesia. So it's actually in any regard going in the contrary direction. So this is why here we partner with the gold standard and the Vera standard, which has a framework of 9 categories, making sure that these offsets actually work and are certified. And this is what I tried to say. In November, the United Nations will decide to regulate globally, and that will, to put it very simple, make it very bad or give the overall pricing and cost conditions around emissions quite a boost, as I said initially. So how does it work? We use an industry standard for reporting footprints for carbon and water, the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative and the Hotel Water Measurement Initiative. Both methodologies were founded by the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, a charity organization from the UK. And we also developed a kind of an assessment service for waste, for solid landfill going into, or solid landfill waste. The problem with solid landfill waste, it's usually the black kind of container where you throw your trash in. The problem with that trash is if you bring it to a landfill site, that it has a 25 times higher carbon emission than any other waste you can produce because of methane gas in there. And so it's a very harmful type of waste, and this is what we measure here. And we implemented these methodologies, so we didn't reinvent the wheel. And we make this assessment available for all hotels globally, for all our 750,000 hotels on our system, free of charge. Formerly, a hotel would have to pay to a service vendor between 900 and 2,500 euros per year in order to get a label. And still the footprint output is questionable because only 30% of these methodologies are standard compliant. So here we want to offer all of our hotel partners this for free. We provide anomaly detection and also services to improve further lowering of these emissions. And we normalize this and provide a benchmark to our corporates, just like you know maybe from the electronics industry where you have these A, B, C, D ratings, very simple and intuitive for travelers. And hotel partners get from us certificates, labels, stickers, and a benchmark to understand how am I performing in my neighborhood, in my destination or my location. And we found that with our previous campaign last year, Clean and Safe, a protocol that we also rolled out due to the pandemic to all hotel partners, that these kind of initiatives provide an uplift of roughly 15% in conversion in the corporate community. So you can get more attractive to corporates if you fulfill these kind of assessments. And you can save €2.70 on average per room night by not having to pay a third-party vendor, which is selling you in a questionable format. So how does it work? We now provide this transparent in all our procurement tools to the procurement managers of the corporates. They can now see your footprint data. They can see it broken down by carbon, water, and waste. They get the benchmark classification. And if you overall achieve an A grade, we award the Green Stay Award and accordingly the label, and we promote you in the HRS booking channels as a hotel partner. And also travelers now have access to this information and can make these smarter decisions. And with that, we're basically trying to pave the way to enable corporates to get transparency in this field, because as said, we have a little more than 9 years to go, and if we're not able to decarbonize this industry and not everybody takes its own responsibility in this, we will have big problems. So yeah, that's about Green Stay and the overall sustainability challenge, ultimately the climate threat challenge. And I really have to urge, after all the very important technology and AI discussions we had earlier today, that every hotelier who is not active in this field and thinks he can just outsource it to a third party, you might be wrong, and you should rather start today than too late. Good. Thanks for listening.